Assalamu alaikum. Myself, Mariam Ali. Today I'm going to explain you about the interrupts here. So there are two type of interrupts: external interrupts and the PC interrupts. PC stands for the pinches interrupts, and these are widely distributed in the 8 mega 3 to 8p. Further on, what are the interrupts? Interrupts are basically the functions, but these are the functions which are on the quickly directed functions that if I'm going to perform some kind of function and then that interrupts call that this function have to be performed, like a reset button. If I'm going to performing any function or any task is performed, but further on the reset button is clicked, then that interrupt is called there and the whole function is reset. So the first one is tunnel interrupts here. These tunnel interrupts are 2 in 8 mega 3 to 8p, and further there are some changes inside them like low level trigger, high level trigger, falling and rising edge, and these things are defined by the registers here. The first register is the external interrupt mask register here, and inside this there are two bits here and the further are reserved. For these bits are calling for the interrupts to be enabled. Further on, when the interrupt is enabled, then the edge level trigger detector on. And for that register, it is a EICRA register, which is the external interrupt control register here. And in this interrupt register, there are two bits for each interrupt. And that are like this: at 00 it is 9, and at 01 it is detecting both falling and rising edge, and further at 10 it is detecting the falling edge, and at 11 it is detecting the rising edge. This is the interrupt flag register here. So these are the rising flag registers here, and further this is the code here for the interrupts. The code is simple is that for the interrupt 0 we have to, as interrupt is on the D2 pin, so we have to declare the input and then we define it as 1 on the port D, so to turn on the pull up for the interrupt. Further on, these two registers are set here. The first one is set as ISC00, that is the both falling and rising edge is on. And further for the interrupt 0, IMAS register is enabled. So whenever the interrupt call while performing our main loop, this main interrupt code function perform. Further, the pin change interrupt here. Pin change interrupts are these here at all. And further there are three registers here for the pin interrupt, and so for the pin interrupt we have to perform PICRA and ask here. So further these are the interrupt vectors. So interrupt vectors are defined here with respect to the priority of the function that is performed. For example, here these are 3 and this is 7, or we can say at this pinch interrupt here. So a function inside which contain both external interrupt request 1 and pinch interrupt request 1. So if my function is calling pinch request 1 and these two, but at same time which is performed first, so interrupt 1 is performed, external interrupt 1 is performed, then the pinch interrupt 1 performed. So this is the thing which is done according to the priority list of the level interrupters. Further on, this is a code task here. By using the interrupt, whenever an external interrupt call, it is displayed on the LCD. So whenever an external interrupt call, it is going to be displayed on the LCD here. So these are the things here like I has two interrupts here, 0 and 1. Further, these are the registers defined here. The two registers defined for the 0 interrupt, the two defined for the 1 interrupt, and further these are the main while loop performing, which is just waiting for the interrupt to be called, and that is displayed on the LCD. And further, when interrupt 0 is called, the interrupt this loop started and interrupt 0 displayed on the LCD. And further on, if the 1 is called, then interrupt 1 is going to be displayed on the LCD. Let me run this code for you. As you show here on the LCD, waiting for interrupts goes on the while loop. But if I'm going to perform this function here, interrupt 1 shows. And further similarly, like interrupt 0, then interrupt 0 shown on the LCD. And there is a hardware process of this video I'm going to show you here. This is the hardware.
इंटरप्ट 0, ठीक है, और इसको हम कर देते हैं 0, ये देते हैं इंटरप्ट, ठीक हो गया। अच्छा, ये इसका हार्डवेयर इधर, ये इंटरप्ट 0, और ये अगर करते हैं प्रेस तो इंटरप्ट 1, ये इंटरप्ट 0, ठीक है, ये इंटरप्ट 1, ठीक है, और ये हमारे पास इसका कोड, ठीक है, जिसमें हम लोगों ने वो इंटरप्ट सर्विस रूटीन को कॉल किया, और ये दो इंटरप्ट 1 के लिए, इंटरप्ट 0 के लिए और इंटरप्ट 1 के लिए।